Going back to the Green Digital Action Declaration, it was really a fantastic milestone with 82 countries that endorsed it by now and over 1,800 non-state actors. But one thing we noticed was that many countries in the endorsement process reached out to us because they weren't quite sure which entity within the government is the one that should be endorsing the declaration. So there seems to be that in some countries it's more on the digital ministry side, in others it's more on the environmental side. So that's why in the next panel I'd like to go a little bit more into detail on this thematic. And to spotlight this issue, I'd like to invite back on stage Dirk Messner from UMA, please, together with Mathieu Wellhoff, the head of digital sobriety of 𝐉𝐮𝐥𝐿, the French environmental agency. Professor Dr. Philipp Hacker from the European New School of Digital Studies, as well as Kilian, Vieth, Ditlmann, Head of Policy, 𝐉𝐮𝐥𝐷𝐿.
Where do we sit? Doesn't matter? Anywhere? Okay. Here's
Thank you very much for joining me on stage. So, Dirk, I'd like to, right from beginning, ask a follow-up question on our presentation. You spoke a lot about codes and the international context, but maybe you can go a little bit into detail, also applying a bit the German lens on how government entities can foster an effective collaboration and integration of the sustainable digital efforts to ensure both the advancement of technology and the protection of the planet at the same time.
To highlight, which is for us very local and very much focused on our own organization, is that 2-3 years ago we took a large decision and opted for building up what you call an AI lab for sustainability solutions within UBA. And we are working now with a group, and I see the director here in the second row, Robert Wagner. We are working with a group of data specialists on the issues which I have been talking about, mitigating the risks, leveraging innovation for sustainability solutions. And the interesting development is that many people within our agency, we have 2,000 colleagues, at the beginning thought that we have now a small group of nerds around in the institution, and all the rest of the teams are moving into the same direction as always. And this is exactly not the case, because what we are seeing is the impact of our work in the AI lab has implications and opportunities for all our divisions, and this makes it a huge progress towards what I talked about. And the last thought maybe, because our colleague from France is also here, on the European level we are cooperating in the field. No? And we have a network of the agencies, the environmental agencies across Europe. We have 33 organizations there. And we try to learn together into this direction, making our decisions more data-based and knowledge-based with high speed.
Perfect, thanks a lot. Philipp, I mean, Dirk mentioned already a few good examples of mechanisms. What models or mechanisms, in addition, can be implemented from your experience?
Yeah, thanks. So I'd like to start out perhaps with the observation that this is a very bad time for sustainable technologies. And there's no way around the fact that around the world there is a backlash against any kind of regulation in general and green regulation in particular. So if you look at the current US administration, they're hell-bent on rolling back anything that has to do with greening technology and greening any kind of infrastructure. Hell-bent on making this planet warmer than it has ever been before, denying climate change. If you think EU, there is a deregulatory turn at the European Commission. And so it's not a good time, generally, that we're living in when you care about these issues. So what can we do? So I think there are 3 things that I want to suggest. The first one is that the AI Act, which was passed before the deregulatory turn, the European AI Act has a few things in it that can be actually used for greater good and that are not particularly harmful. So the first one is about disclosures. We just need more information. The agencies, the scholars, everyone needs more information to know what's actually happening, to know how much energy and water some of the large AI models are consuming, for example. Now, there is an obligation for this in the AI Act. The problem is that it contains only an obligation to disclose figures for development. Now, you might say, oh, these big models, development, that's a big chunk. But if you look at the latest research papers by 𝐁𝐞𝐫𝐥𝐄 and her great team at Hugging Face, for example, they show very clearly that after half a year, inferences is what takes over. So we got to look at inferences of AI models and inferences or interactions on platforms. Because if you have 100 million users, that's a lot more impactful than just the mere first training of the model. And inferences are not, at least not by the wording, covered by the disclosure paradigm in the AI Act. Now, we have made suggestions through the German government with the help of Uber and others to amend that a little bit in the code of practice that is currently being discussed. And in the third draft, in fact, it is in there that inferences need to be disclosed across benchmarks, but we'll see whether it's actually in the final draft. So this is something to watch out for, and if not, to push really for making clear that this should be something in the scope of the AI Act. Second and third thing, real quick. Second thing is sustainability impact assessments, which is also something that you can read into the AI Act, which I think is necessary because at the moment the market forces and the general environment is just not conducive to having this as one factor in addition to performance metrics and being #1 on a leaderboard. Third factor, we got to start talking about additionality. Those who are burning up most of the fuel or who are burning out or who are using most energy should be under an obligation to partially offset this by investing in and creating new renewables. Because Google and other companies, they're now amongst the biggest utility providers and energy traders in the US because they're pulling renewables from everywhere. It's a good thing. I mean, it's better than if they were using gas all the time or whatever, or coal. But it means that there is less renewables for other sectors. So we need more of these sources. Last thought, I think that particularly at this time of deregulation and regulatory craze around the world, Europe can position itself as kind of the adult in the room. And it can be a label of recognition to say, folks, we're watching out for the twin transition. We're not only accelerating AI, because of course we want more AI in Europe as well, but we're also mindful of the planetary boundaries and making that a hallmark and a seal of excellence in Europe. And I think many of the companies that we're working with and many of the countries around the world that are still reasonable in their policy making will join us in this effort.
Thanks a lot, Philipp. And yes, you mentioned it, the twin transition. I mean, that's why we're here for, today, to really try to make sure that the twin transition is in everybody's head as the normal state of approaching green and digital. And actually, I'd like to turn to you, Mathieu, because France is a global leader in green digital policy. So wanted to ask you if you could share some of the key examples of green digital policy within France, but also in how far the collaboration among the entities work to reach this current status.
Okay. First of all, we are not used to be a leader in any environmental policy in France. Usually, I've been working in the field for long years, and usually we kind of look at what's happening around us, and especially in Germany, and then we copy and paste it. That's our classical policy making in France, in the environment field. So now we are a leader, which is awkward for us. And the feedback I can share with you is that, well, prospects are not really good, because as you mentioned, it is not a good time, but we started earlier. So we already have some regulation in place, two laws at national level, and a lot of methodology implemented for companies, local communities, and so on. And we're mostly focused, Dirk, I loved your presentation. We're mostly focusing on the second shift that you mentioned. Try to reduce the direct environmental impact of IT technologies, and basically it's working really slowly, because there's a lot of public policies that are easy to implement. Everything related to devices, computers, laptop, phones, and so on. it's kind of simple, just a longer lifespan. And that's a classical public policy. But everything which relates to data centers, so digital service is directly linked to the use of digital services. And here, there's a lot of policies that go into efficiency, which you mentioned. And there's amazing increase of efficiencies in data centers. But it's more than offset by the sheer number of new data centers. So we need to move forward and go beyond efficiency. And that requires real policy choices that are not made at the time. Because if you want to go further than the efficiency, then you have to think sobriety. And sobriety is something that policymakers are not able to push at the time. So that's basically, we are in advance. We can share what works, efficiency, lifespan of devices, but it's not enough, not by far. And the second, really quickly, what we can say, we also look at the actual efficiency of digital solution for the environment. So IT for green or AI for green. There's no, as far as I know, there is no study at even at global level that really look at, is it working or not? Because the industry is of course selling us a lot of results, and the IAM report that you mentioned is really interesting on potential effects. Is it working or not? Well, the real issue is rebound effect, and we are analyzing this now. It's going to be the first in the world, which will publish, I think, in September or October. And first result, rebound effect is important, to say the least. So at least the direct impact of green digital solutions are much lower than expected.
Thank you very much, Mathieu. And it was already mentioned several times, data and transparency is, of course, very important so that we don't talk about potential negative or potential positive impacts. So, Kilian, how can algorithmic accountability frameworks and transparency be used to evaluate and mitigate the negative and or positive impacts?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I think I can pick up on a lot of aspects that have been mentioned here, because it's almost a bit embarrassing to say, but we still don't know how much energy AI consumes. After all these years of research, so many groups, so many projects, we're still somewhat in the dark about that. And that is a situation that we really need to change. Philipp mentioned how the AI Act is making first steps in that regard. I would say baby steps maybe, because the corporate lobbying against these transparency requirements was quite intense at the time of lawmaking. But there's really no way around of understanding all the environmental impacts along the entire AI supply chain. These days we talk a lot about the energy question, and their data centers are at the heart of the issue, and especially also in the use phase of AI systems. We recently had this IEA report that projected like a doubling of energy consumption for data centers until 2030, right? And that's less than 5 years away, 2030. So we're really talking about, these projections are a bit crazy when you look at them like closely, and how much additional capacity is being built there for, or in large part driven by AI or for AI development and AI use. And really being clear about that and creating transparency there, and would allow us to make more targeted policy proposals and policy, like what Dirk called in his keynote, mitigating the negative effects, right? It's not saying we cannot use AI for potential applications in other places, but there we are often talking about marginal gains that AI can really bring to the table, and adding so much new electricity consumption, for example, because the same IEA report says that the biggest chunk of that will be new fossil power plants. That's really the risk we're looking at here, that new gas plants around the globe are being built for these additional data centers. So I really can echo Philipp's demand here that we need to match these additional consumption with additional renewables, not with additional fossil fuels, because otherwise this becomes a really dirty technology, AI, and not a clean one. Philipp, you
Yes, Philipp, please go ahead.
Yeah, just one follow-up. I think from a conceptual perspective, it's also important to remind ourselves that there are direct and indirect effects, as you mentioned. And often it's said, well, there is this direct effect, AI and stuff is consuming a lot of energy, and then there is this positive potential effect that it has because it's speeding up whatever green transition is on. But to be quite honest, there's two indirect effects. AI can be used, of course, for making data centers greener, and then there is always this one example from Google from 2016 when they actually lowered apparently energy consumption or cooling energy consumption by I can't remember 30 or 40%, and that's great. I mean, that's great, and please keep doing that. But at the same time, indirect effects also means it is applied in other areas. There's a recent article, fantastic article by 𝐁𝐞𝐫𝐥𝐄, which shows that this technology is actively marketed to ExxonMobil and others for oil and gas exploitation, which of course is another indirect effect. The applications of AI can be for good or bad, of course. And so conceptually, we need to make sure that when we mention the potential of AI for making this planet greener, we also need to mention the potential and the very clear already implemented solutions for making this planet a lot less green. So it's just conceptually, I think, an important move to keep in mind, and we need to see, and I'd be super happy to read that report, which one of those is actually more important at this moment, keeping in mind just the Jevons paradox, the rebound effects that are now being studied by a number of scholars around the world.
Yeah, it's fantastic to know that ADEM is working on such a report so that it's hopefully soon no longer the potential, but that we know what is actually the real data behind it. Mathieu, just a little bit more. I mean, we heard a lot about how important collaboration is. Well, it's always, of course, mentioned in such conferences, but can you go a little bit more into detail how ADEM is collaborating with different stakeholders from different disciplines, but also share maybe some of the challenges with us and how you manage to overcome them?
Okay. First of all, it's still a new topic. So you mentioned that we still don't know the energy consumption. We have studies in France to measure it. But to be precise, we need to work together. So for instance, in ADEM, we never publish report together. We always do it with the 𝐉𝐻𝐄. He's in the room, the regulatory authority for telecommunication, and now more and more with the regulatory authority for what's in the internet. So the 𝐉𝐻𝐄, which actually regulates TV channels, internet content, and so on. So we always work together because there's not enough knowledge in one part. Second thing is we're working on a daily basis with the research on that. So the main projects we have are with the national research centers and the National Research Center on IT in Riel, also in the room. And because we're not, even though we're in advance, our knowledge base is not broad enough. And you also asked, what are the challenges? Well, I think the main challenges we have, and that's the first shift, Dirk, that you mentioned, is how to align those two transitions. And the basic issue that I see is that mindset are completely different.